Hey, hi, my name is Jonathan Blythe. I work for the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and today I'm also presenting on, hosting this meeting on behalf of the IARPIC technology team, as well as the data team who's co-hosting, as well as the field operations working group. We've been discussing for a while the opportunity to highlight field stations to complement the field operations working group focus on ocean-going cruises that happens over the summer. And the main idea is that these terrestrial field sites are really important, as well as investments for Arctic research, but they haven't been highlighted to the same extent. So in trying to figure out which and how we couch this within the ARPIC, the different collaboration teams, the technologies teams really decided to step up and focus to lead these field site highlight meetings moving forward, because this will give us an opportunity to look at investments, federal investments in technology that helps us study Arctic processes. So for the very first one, we're going to focus here on the Toolik Field Station. And this is a conversation we've been having with folks over at Toolik for the past year. We just missed them. It was around last March, 2024, when we first reached out to them and they were getting ready for the field. So we missed that, but this is a good opportunity now. I think it's really timely with the anniversary that they're celebrating for this field station being around for so many, it's 50 years, which is about the same amount of time as the environmental studies program that I work for. So it seems like, the 70s was a really important time for a lot of environmental things, including Toolik, that we'd like to highlight today. So the first presenter is Rachel DeSobrino. She is the remote sensing and GIS analyst at Toolik Field Station, where she supports research projects for data collection, custom mapping, and analysis, data processing, and other things. Prior to her time at Toolik, Rachel worked at the Polar Geospatial Center and staffed the GIS office at McMurdo Station. So I'd just like to note for technology team, we have a specific interest at looking at how technology can be transferred across poles. It's not specific to the Arctic, and Rachel's background at McMurdo is a great example of that. Also, she has a BS in geography from University of Minnesota with a focus in dendrochronology. So Rachel, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to get set up screen sharing here. Can you let me know if it looks like you're seeing the correct screen here?
Looks good.
Thanks so much. All right, thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you all for joining us this morning. I am taking over from Randy, our GIS manager, who wasn't able to join us today. So we're just going to cover some GIS technology at Toolik and some of the services that we offer to our researchers. So overview, we're going to chat where is Toolik Field Station, and then what we do, specifically focusing on our GNSS equipment. And so that's basically GPS surveys, but with added non-American satellite constellations as well. And then some of the drone projects that we've supported recently at Toolik. So hopefully not making you dizzy here. Toolik is located on the North Slope of Alaska. Our field station operates year-round. In the summer months, we might have upwards of 100 residents at station, but year-round, staff from the Spatial and Environmental Data Center are collecting baseline measurements, doing remote access support for our researchers. And researchers at Toolik get a lot of support from the station, logistics, transportation, as well as science and remote sensing GIS support. So Toolik GIS is up at station pretty much from May to September, a few breaks tossed in, and that's where we're doing the majority of our field work, which is largely these GNSS surveys and drone surveys for research groups. So Toolik Field Station is also home to one of only 7 CORS stations on the North Slope, and CORS stands for Continually Operating Reference Stations. So these are on 24 hours, they're logging GPS data at 1-second intervals, and this is standardized to the national reference data. And this data set, this CORS station is what allows us and you and anyone else on the North Slope to get 0.5 to 5 centimeter accuracy in our GPS surveys. So this data is publicly available through the NGS website. That's the National Geodetic Survey. And TLK2, this CORS station, is co-managed by Earthscope and Gauge. And you can see that in the image to the right. That's TLK2. It's on thermopylons in the tundra. So when we're not at Toolik Field Station, and usually this is if we're about 5 miles away or more, we're going to deploy a mobile base station that functions in a similar way to that TLK2 station. And we're post-processing this with TLK2 and the rest of the CORS network. And essentially what we're trying to do here is get a really good coordinate on some reference location. And in the tundra, where everything seems to be moving all of the time, our reference location is usually a big old rock. That's the most stable thing we can find. So that's why I say now we know where this rock is, because we're taking coordinates on a lot of rocks across the North Slope. And this mobile base setup is what allows us to measure sub-centimeter change in subsidence for researchers all up the North Slope when we're not near the field station. So here's what that looks like in the field, setting up the mobile base and then using rovers to collect data at specific sites. And we're going to be talking about all sorts of permafrost features today. Brandon's going to be talking about some thermo-erosional gullies and water tracks, but we're going to zoom in here on a retrogressive thaw slump that's been expanding south of Toolik over the past several years. It's about 10 miles south of the field station. So let's take a better look at that. Here is a publicly available preview image from Maxar, which provides commercial satellite imagery. And this photo happened to be taken 2 days ago, which is actually really impressive for our area, but it's a bit snowy. We can't really see the feature. Looking at another image, this one managed to be collected in our short snow-free season in the summer, but there's some hazy clouds in the way, so we wouldn't really be able to see the ground feature that we're looking at. And another one, we have clouds, we have snow, we have these reflectance artifacts, which is what the no data looks like, but you get the point, and that satellite imagery in our area isn't the most reliable for being able to image features. We have a pretty short summer season where there's no snow, and especially being just north of the Brooks Range, we get clouds rolling across all of the time. And so while we do have access to satellite tasking through the Polar Geospatial Center through Maxar, meaning that we can say, please take an image of this specific site, we usually get fewer than 5 collections per summer, and of those images, plenty of them are going to have clouds, and it can snow in any month, even in the peak summer up on the tundra. So satellite imagery doesn't quite work for us when you combine the weather, the snow-free season. We're often better off being able to image these features ourselves. And that's where our drone program comes in. So our first data collections were in 2017, predate my time at Toolik, using a GoPro. Nowadays, we're flying an RGB and a multispectral camera, and we post-process our GPS coordinates using that mobile base station data, or TLK2, to within 3 centimeters accuracy, horizontal and vertical. And we also can get up to 0.5 centimeter resolution on this imagery. So that's way better than what you can get with the commercial satellites, obviously, which are usually about 50 centimeters in resolution. And the positional accuracy of those photos can be up to 3 to 5 meters, and would always require some ground control. So any researcher at Toolik can request drone support from Toolik GIS for their project. Last year, we put 32 flight hours on our drones, and we supported 13 different projects. And that's from vegetation to erosion and hydrology, including some of the work that Brandon's going to be talking about in a minute here. So again, this work all relies on the high accuracy of our mobile base station and our CORS network. And here's that feature, the retrogressive thaw slump, that we're going to be taking a look at. It's pretty large, doesn't fit in the full frame of the photos here. And here are real humans for scale. Looking again at what we can get with satellite imagery, it's hazy, it's coarse, we can't pick out too many details. But here's what we have in our first drone image from 2019 of the region. A lot more details, again, in the head wall, drone image versus satellite image. And then we can flip through the years. 2019, here's where the head wall was. We have 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. And you can probably tell visually that there are some changes there, but the great thing about these drone products in the GIS software is that we can quantify those changes and see that the head wall has receded 48 meters over the last 5 years. And we can also look at this in 3D. So in addition to those pretty orthomosaics that we produce, we also make digital surface models using photogrammetry from this data. Here's a simple black and white terrain model, and then we can overlay it with the RGB image to make it stand out and go on a tour into the feature itself. And again, with our GIS software, we can measure these distances. So this head wall is almost 3 meters tall, 2.86 meters. And as you can see by the size of this feature, the way it's changing throughout the years, there may be a lot of ecosystem impacts occurring here from the sedimentation. There's revegetation occurring in the bowl of the feature. It's connected to a nearby lake, which is connected to other lakes, so it could be downstream impacts as well. The last time we were in here, we almost got eaten by the mud monster because it's so wet in there. So definitely an interesting feature to be monitoring. And the next permafrost feature that we're going to talk about are ice wedge polygons. This was in support of Dr. Nick Jelinski out of the U of M, Minnesota. And in the foreground here, you can see some of those ice wedge polygon features. And then this is down by Galbraith Lake here. And you can also see the Galbraith Airport, which is an untowered airstrip in the area. So you can note how close this is to infrastructure as well, this patterned ground. So Dr. Jelinski's work is on measuring carbon stocks in these ice wedge polygon features along a latitudinal gradient. You can see how this landscape is spread out all throughout in that helicopter photo, as well as the 4 areas that we flew in support of this project near the airstrip. And then in this diagram in the lower left from Woodwell Climate, you can see the process of the formation of ice wedge polygons. And I'm going to leave those carbon calculations to the researchers and just briefly mention some of the change detection potential here with this data. So this figure to the left is showing the elevation difference between a drone flight that we flew last summer, so July 2024, and the multi-year Arctic DEM elevation mosaic data set. So that's 15 years up until 2022. And you can really see subsidence occurring in those troughs with those darker values, as well as near the ditches of the road. Also, here are the tails of one of the features that Brandon's going to be talking about, a thermo-erosional gully that's just north of the road there. And anyone who's been at Toolik has plenty to complain about in terms of road conditions and construction. And so this data set, collected it to monitor ice wedge polygons in support of research, but there are also potential implications in terms of monitoring impacts on infrastructure from tools like this. And then just to zoom here to the right on what this resolution offers, these white blobs here are tussock mounds that we're looking at. Then in these are the deepening of the trough of the ice wedge polygons. And then these wavy features are showing solifluction, mass moving downslope from freeze-thaw cycles. So there are a lot of applications that could be brought out from these digital surface models. And that's just one example of the couple examples of the products that we've collected in support of research at Toolik. Here is all of the drone flights that we've done since 2017. So we've done 372 flights to date, and this spans over 100 miles of the Dalton Highway. You'll see a few hotspots that are far off the highway, specifically to the northwest. That's where the Anaktuvik River fire occurred in 2007, I believe. But most of our drone flights are occurring near station, or near the Obnaviat Hill Slope, which is just to the east and nearby. So what's next for Toolik GIS? We're always looking to expand our services to the research community, solicit input on what sensors we could add to our fleet. We're hoping to add hyperspectral and LiDAR imaging per request of some of our researchers. And we're also looking at having to replace both of our DJI drones in the next year to avoid a disruption in services. So we're currently exploring grant opportunities, and we would definitely welcome any suggestions from this community in terms of funding that, as well as if you have a US-made drone that you love, we'd love to hear about it. We also have big plans this year to archive our backlog of drone data. So all of this that you were just looking at, we want to archive that as well as provide a queryable service so that researchers could see where else we have flown, access that data, and introduce new collaborations and research out of already collected data. Thank you for your time. That's it from me. Open to any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I'm going to look at the chat. I guess if people want to raise their hand, if they have a question. See some people clapping. That's great. And we can also save questions for the end. We'll have some time for discussion. There's something in the chat, so just read that from Anna. Rachel, it would be amazing if you could invest in LiDAR that can map the bottom of shallower water bodies.
We agree. We absolutely agree.
Yeah, initially when planning this meeting, I had wanted to focus on lakes, lake focus, but this was, you can use some of the same technology, of course, to do both if you can see through the water. Well, great. I think we're going to have there's some topics that Rachel primed for further discussion, data access, the impacts on infrastructure, other broader impacts, which we can revisit at the end. So just want to thank Rachel again for a great talk. And I'm going to move next to Brandon. I'll introduce Brandon. Brandon Yoakley has a master's degree from Kansas State University and bachelor's degree from Appalachian State University. And he is a fourth-year PhD candidate at Idaho State University. Today, you will hear about his dissertation research on topographic and hydrologic characteristics of gullies in the upland Arctic. He's going to defend his dissertation this spring and will be pursuing a geospatial career in the private sector. So Brandon, thank you for joining us, and it's your turn.
Cool. Can y'all see this okay? Let me find my map. Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for introducing me. Like I said, my name is Brandon Yoakley, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about gullies and landscape change in the Toolik region. So before we can talk about gullies, we first need to know what is a gully. And gullies are just channelized depressions that preferentially route water off of the hill slopes. And these features can range between, a couple meters up to 35 meters in width and of roughly 0.5 meter to 5 meters in depth. So they're kind of small features that may not be able to be sensed from satellite imagery. And if we look at here are these two images I have on the bottom of the screen. The one on the left is a recent gully right near Galbraith Lake that formed following a major rainstorm in July of 2003. And here on the right is a much more stable gully that formed also following a major rainstorm in July of 2003. So we can see that these features are pretty large, it can be pretty large in scale and move a bunch of sediment downstream, impacting downstream water quality. So because of their channelized nature, we can identify them using something called LiDAR. And so I'm going to give a really, really basic and short introduction of what LiDAR is. Basically what it is, it stands for light and detect, oh God, what is it? Light and detection ranging. But basically what it does is it shoots light or lasers at the ground and collects the time it takes to actually come back to that sensor. And the two things we're interested in is this first return, which indicates the first object that light reflects off of, in this case, just the tops of vegetation. And then this last return, in which case this is kind of what we think of as the ground surface. It can be more complicated than this, but I just want this is what we generally think of. And we can use these first and last returns to get at things like vegetation height, vegetation canopy density, leaf area index, so on and so forth. We can also use these last returns to map out the ground surface, so creating something called a digital terrain model instead of a digital surface model. And for the work that I do, which is kind of looking at gullies across the landscape, I'm really interested in these last returns or these digital terrain models. But you may be asking yourself, why do we collect LiDAR data? Well, LiDAR data provides much higher resolution images of the ground surface. So this is a really great figure from Neon that shows in the background some, let's just pretend they didn't state exactly what the imagery is from, but let's just assume that it's from satellite-based topographic imagery. And we can think of each one of these little boxes or these little squares is a 30-meter pixel. So that means it's taking the average elevation across 900 square meters. So if we have a feature that's only a couple meters wide, we're not going to be able to image that. On the flip side, we can use something like LiDAR that has pixel sizes of 1 square meter, and that way we can then actually image the features that we're interested in. This is really obvious when we look at things like the road network here in this image, as well as these smaller valleys and these ridge tops. So one of the things I want to go over is how can we use LiDAR to detect gullies in the Arctic? Before we can go over that, we first need to go over what LiDAR data sets I'm actually using. Namely, I'm using the Foothills DEM, which is a LiDAR data set that was flown by the Alaska DOT in 2009 and covers approximately 1,600 square kilometers just to the northwest of Toolik, which is shown in a red star here in all this image and pretty much all of the upcoming images, as well as Neon LiDAR that was flown in both 2017 and 2022. So this was approximately 400 square kilometers. It was flown just to the east of Toolik. Again, Toolik is the red star here. One thing I want to point out about this Neon data that I won't discuss in this slide, but I think is important for others, if you're interested in things like vegetation productivity or saturation patterns on the landscape, in conjunction with the LiDAR data that Neon collects, they also collect high-resolution hyperspectral imagery and natural color imagery. So if those are more of your research topics, I implore you to see what publicly available resources Neon provides for this area. With that said, let's talk about how we can actually use LiDAR to detect gullies on the landscape. Well, we can derive some sort of topographic parameters from this LiDAR data. Namely, I'm going to talk about relief, so how incised as a point relative to the surroundings, as well as slope, so basically how steep the actual landscape is. So if we look at this image here on the top right, we can see black areas are higher relative to its surroundings, where the lighter colored or white areas are lower compared to its surroundings. And in this case, we can see that this gully here shows up pretty well as just a light colored image. When we look at the slope map of the same thing, we can see that these darker areas show steeper slopes. So we can kind of see the banks that create this channelized depression shown here. When we think of broader scale LiDAR, like identifying gullies in LiDAR, we can use a combination of relief and slope, as shown in this middle image here, where again, these lighter colors are showing depressions. And we can visually identify gullies on the landscape, like all of these yellow triangles are shown here. And so this work has been done before, namely using this Foothills DEM that I mentioned earlier. So a prior master's student from our department, Casey Krieger, in 2012, identified approximately 7,000 thermokarst features across the 1,600 square kilometers, with over half of them being gullies, so approximately 3,800 of them. This indicates that these gullies are pretty common within the region, maybe more so common than most people would think. However, one thing I want to point out from the work that Krieger did is he identified all of these gullies visually in the LiDAR. And so that leads to some subjectivity. So things that I may think look like a gully may be different from what he thought was a gully and from what y'all think is a gully. So a large portion of my dissertation has been trying to develop an automated gully detection system, or a workflow, I should say. So myself and some colleagues went out and trudged around the tundra while up at Toolik and identified a bunch of gullies and something called water tracks, which are just unchannelized flow features that are super common in the region. And we used these field observations and matched them to LiDAR-derived topographic parameters, things like slope and relief, to actually map out where gullies are forming on the landscape. So we're going to zoom into these two orange squares here and kind of look at what the results of this objective method show. In this case, my method found approximately 3,800 gullies spread across 400 square kilometers, and this kind of indicates that these gullies comprise approximately 6% of the total hill slope flow network in this area. And when we look at these two maps, all of these blue lines are delineated water tracks, and all of these yellow lines are delineated gullies. So you can see that these gullies are pretty common in the area. They're just a lot of yellow, and they make up approximately 26% of the hill slope flow networks contain a gully. So we can look at kind of gullies from this like broad scale view and see that they're common on the common on the landscape near Toolik. But one of the other things I want to talk about today is how is the landscape changing through time? And so recall that neon flew LiDAR in both 2017 and 2022, and we can difference these two LiDAR data sets to get at how the landscape is changing. So I subtracted the 2017 from the 2022 LiDAR and then filtered that LiDAR data set to remove any areas that were near the pipeline or near the Dalton Highway or near any scientific instrumentation like boardwalks, Toolik, et cetera, as well as removed any of the points that were like below our detection limit. In this case, it's plus or minus 25 centimeters, meaning anything that changed within 25 centimeters, we are just going to count as noise. In doing that, we can see that the majority of the landscape is subsiding, as shown here, and the majority of that subsidence is not as great as we would probably suspect. It's roughly in the range of 1 meter to 30 centimeters. So the landscape is changing, we know that, but it may not be changing as much as we think. If we want to kind of shift gears and think of something like a more point measurements of how the landscape is changing, we can look at how gullies may be expanding on the landscape. So I did some preliminary analysis a couple months ago after differencing these LiDAR data sets just to try to identify areas where gullies may be expanding and found evidence for at least 18 new gullies that had formed between 2017 and 2022. So I'm going to go over two examples of these, the first of which is near Ox Creek up in the northeast portion of this LiDAR data set. So if we zoom in here, we can see we have a slope map here, slope maps here in the middle. And then on the left, we have two field photos from this site that were taken in late August 2024. My field tech for reference is, I think, 5'2". So we can see that there is these soil cracks and soil drapes along the margins of the gully, indicating that it may have recently formed. And when we look at the slope map from 2017, we can see a lack of banks or a lack of channelization on the landscape. However, when we look at the 2022 slope map, we can see that this gully has expanded quite a bit upstream. When we jump across Ox Creek to this feature right here, we can see the same thing. Again, the photos on the left were taken in late August 2024. I am 6 foot tall for reference. So again, we can see here that this gully has expanded kind of both laterally and upstream. Interestingly, this is also one of the only times I've found evidence for exposed massive ground ice in the area near Toolik. So this indicates that this gully is more than likely going to continue to expand upstream as this melts out and the ground continues to collapse. If we zoom back out again and take a look at one more gully, kind of much closer to Toolik, just to the east, we again see similar features. We again see this soil cracking and soil drapes along the margins of the gully, indicating that it is somewhat active. And we look at the slope map from 2017. Again, we see this lack of banks or lack of channelization. However, when we zoom into the 2022 slope map, we again see these banks and channelized form of the gully. So these gullies are becoming more common on the landscape. They're expanding across the landscape, impacting downstream water quality, like mobilizing carbon or sediments. So understanding how common these features are and where they may form is pretty important. So I want to leave off this presentation with some future questions and research opportunities that I think is super interesting and things that I was not able to kind of answer as my time as a PhD student. And I have a couple of these questions. The first of which is, what drives the initial formation of gullies? We know the processes by which they form, but we're unsure of what causes that initial formation. And if we know what may cause this initial formation, can we predict where gullies may form? and using and being able to predict where they form, will we be able to create any sort of like hazard maps or any other things like that that will then be able to inform us how gully formation may impact either pre-existing or future Arctic infrastructure? So I think these are things that are still up in the air. I think these are great research opportunities for people in this call that may be in academics that maybe want to think about like how are these gullies forming on the landscape and where they may form. So with that, I'd just like to give a quick shout out to NSF for funding all of this, Neon for collecting all of this data that I've been able to use in my time at ISU, as well as my colleagues at ISU and at Appalachian State University. And then lastly, Toolik for all the logistical support and housing us and feeding us, et cetera, et cetera. None of this work would be possible without all the people there. So I'm happy to take questions or comments.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. So I'm going to look in the chat for questions for Brandon, and we can also entertain questions for Rachel if there's a lingering question there. So I really like that histogram. I think when you showed me your preliminary results, I thought, oh, we need to see a histogram of this, and it's showing subsidence on, I guess, on the main mode of where soil is going, so it's going up or down, and that's telling you like the size, the depth, right? So that how much it's subsided. Is there a sense of how big that feature is? I know it's
So
probably
that
growing, but is there a sense of how big these features are on, in that same sense, in the sense of a distribution?
Yeah, so the distribution is across the entirety of this black polygon here. So it's kind of across all 400 square kilometers of the LiDAR data set. But if we want to think of like from an individual point perspective, like how this may be expanding, the scale here is like roughly 200 meters of expansion for this particular gully here. And you could like easily calculate the volume loss here by just summing up the difference or like the subsidence for each individual pixel across this gully. I don't have that number offhand though. I have not done much work that has looked at like mapping out each individual feature outside of that preliminary analysis from this map. So I don't have that answer. I can tell you from a broad like landscape scale, but in general, there's been subsidence happening versus any sort of aggregation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and it was the initial comment you had that gullies are relatively small, but I think that's a relative. I mean, you said 20. Was it 20 kilometers for that one feature? So that's pretty big from my perspective. I think that's huge.
Yeah, I don't think that this is 200 meters, so 0.2 kilometers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Still big.
This is a pretty large gully. Most of the gullies that I've identified in the field have been anywhere from like 0.5 meter deep to 1.5 meters deep, and approximately 5 to 15 meters in width. So they're overall pretty small, at least definitely compared to like the retrogressive thaw slumps that Rachel talked about prior.
Right. Yeah, it's both, different scales. So I did want to drive this towards that question on scale, since it's a geospatial or cartographic focus for this session. Can you tell me, each of you, can you tell me how the unique tools that you're bringing to bear, the sensor technology and analysis, informs the research that you're doing at that specific scale? And so I guess maybe we should start with Rachel, like with the drone data. What questions are the drone data more conducive to answering, and how would you get at, say, the same question at a larger scale?
Yeah, I mean, the drone data is definitely useful for measuring these finer scale features on like a feature by feature basis. I think a lot of those specific change detection questions or quantifying things like volume and spread are better applications for the drone data, where we can get a much finer resolution and ensure that we have better positional accuracy, for example. And these larger data sets, like Brandon is talking about with the LiDAR data sets and NEON specifically, are really great for identification. And there are definitely applications for change detection out of those as well. I think that we're really lucky to have the NEON data set in our area, especially being somewhere where we don't have access to a lot of other satellite products. That's something that I am using a lot for identifying features, pointing researchers to, et cetera, is something that's public and open source. So we're glad to have that. And that's also great in that there are a lot of different products from NEON that you can stack on top of it using the LiDAR imagery, also having access to orthomosaic imagery as well. So that's super helpful for identifying features, but definitely having data sets that let us look at the entire landscape as well as zooming in on specific features is helpful.
Great. That's maybe she answered it for you, Brandon, but take a shot at that question, please.
Yeah, I think Rachel definitely hit it on the head. I think of a lot of the work that I do as kind of being more at like a landscape scale versus like the drone imagery is really great for like plot scale or feature scale work. We can get at like how is the landscape changing through time or identifying features broadly across the landscape. I think they're like answering two different research questions. Like, are you focusing on how does a single feature change over time? Like we have a feature at Galbraith that formed, was the first slide of my talk, formed after a rainstorm in 2003. We can get at how those features form, but like how is the landscape broadly changing through time is something that like these NEON LiDAR data sets can provide. Or like that Foothills DEM can provide, like how common are these thermokarst features on the landscape? And, are they preferentially forming in areas like on steeper slopes, shallower slopes? We can combine that with other things like surficial geology maps. Are they forming preferentially in more fine-grained or coarse-grained sediments, et cetera, et cetera? So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, but not being a terrestrial person, that's very clear. Thank you for the explanation. And I really understand. I think I understand it now. So, so I did want to ask. I don't want to put Anna Leggell on the spot, but I know she's got some background or interest in permafrost mapping. And is there any? Do you want to add anything about this question of scale and how you would scale this up, say, to like a regional level to look at thermokarst or the other features that Rachel talked about at
Yeah,
the regional scale?
yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think the LiDAR is so really critical data and important data for any kind of remote sensing that is happening on larger scales where you do not have LiDAR. So what you are creating here of building up the LiDAR capability of Toolik is that you are building up training data that could be used for machine learning, deep learning models for doing applications on much larger regions where we have maxar imagery, but not necessarily LiDAR. So you could, train these AI models on the areas where you have the LiDAR on understanding the canopy structure, for example, or learning more about the thermokarst features and so on. So I think here, having that combined capability of LiDAR and hyperspectral collected at the same time provides that foundation to connect into the same type of bands, wavelengths that Maxar is built on, and the polar geospatial centers imagery that they provide, because they are, I think, a really important collaborator here with the Toolik offering the ground truth and the Polar Geospatial Center offering this big regional application where we can map these features across larger regions. And then you end up, if you do map across larger regions, you end up with very, very big data sets, terabyte-sized data set, especially if you go across the entire Arctic. So then comes to the point of like, how do you work with these really big data sets? And that's where I've been collaborating with Arctic Data Center in the last couple of years under the Permafrost Discovery Gateway, is to allow the Arctic Data Center to, I mean, they already know how to archive and keep data there, you know, so it's not going away, but they are building their capability to allow people to easily access, whether it's to visualize the data on a web browser, so you don't have to download the data, or if you are interested in just a portion of these really big data sets and you want to download it to work with it on your ArcGIS, then you can do that. So we have a feature coming up here in April with allowing for partial download on this really big geospatial data sets. Because this, for example, we mapped ice wedge polygons across the entire Arctic region from the Maxar imagery. And if you download that data set onto your computer and try to open it ArcGIS, ArcGIS is not going to want to help you out. So I think it's definitely a teamwork with many science support organizations working together here, where Toolik is there to offer the truth of what's really happening on the ground, and Polar Geospatial Center offering this pan-Arctic coverage and applications. So we're getting to the point now, not with Maxar and Polar Geospatial Center imagery, because that's not collected as frequently, but Sentinel, for example, every 2 weeks or so this summer we'll have some near real-time pan-Arctic monitoring with taking abruptly drained lakes as the first example. But that could be expanded to other features too, that it makes sense to use Sentinel to monitor that at a monthly scale. So I think we are living in very, very exciting times in Arctic science. And yeah, thank you for offering the support that you do in Toolik.
Yeah, thanks, Anna, for taking that question or giving the answer. So I think since you mentioned data, Amanda Young is on the call, and I wonder, Amanda, if you want to put in a plug for the systems you have to disseminate some of this imagery data or other field station data from Toolik.
Yeah, I can do a little bit of that. So hi everyone, I'm Amanda Young. I'm the Spatial Environmental Data Center Manager at Toolik. And while Rachel mentioned we're getting our drone flights compiled so that we can share them broadly, so groups can look at where we've already have drone flights. Maybe you want to install a research project, but you want it to be where there is this historical data that you can then have leverage that for future work. So that's in the works right now. But we have most of our baseline data sets, so climate data sets, plant phenology, snow, ice, animal observations, all those things are also on the Arctic Data Center. So like Anna mentioned, for the Permafrost Discovery Gateway, Toolik also has their data sets hosted there. And most of the researchers in and around Toolik, all of those ones doing NSF work, have their data either on Data One or within the Arctic Data Center. And some of our data is also available through our website. So if you want to look at our meteorological data, for instance, we have a way to look at all that data straight from our website. We have a query, so you can look at it. We update it quarterly so that people can get that data relatively quick, instead of waiting an entire year to see what the data from the prior year was at the field station. And always, if you're like, is there a data set that exists out there that might not already be online, you can email me and I'll be like, yeah, here's where this, or I know this research group is doing that kind of work, and direct you to get contacts with other researchers that might be collecting direct you towards like the column grid network folks that are looking at permafrost depth in the Arctic. Or if you want to know about bird observations, I can direct you to those groups as well. So I know birds might not be really this group's audience, but just as an example of we can redirect people to other researchers who are doing relatable work that might have data sets that they can then work together with on going forward and have some collaborations. And we always welcome folks to come up and work with us or ask about what can we do to help with different projects. We have the GIS services, the environmental data center side helps collect data for research projects, sometimes with people, or if they're not at the field station. So Brandon's project, we went out and dug some snow pits and did some camera work for them when they weren't there in the spring, but they needed work. So we assist in sort of extending the field season and observations beyond from when just the researchers at the station. But if you have any questions, you can contact me. I'll drop my email in the chat.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, so there's one more question. I missed it, but thanks to Meredith for pointing it out. Cynthia is asking about indigenous communities, and let me rephrase the question in a way, but she can clarify if she wants. How are the data that Toolik Field Station collects beneficial to local or indigenous residents who may subsist, may live in the area? Is there a way that they can access the data and use it? And how are you thinking about engaging with them now and in the future?
Cindy, if you want to jump in.
Yes. Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. And it definitely not just as users, but also as producers of data sets, and how we empower them to also, have their observations and knowledge to be part of the data collection. And how do you I guess present those type of information in GIS and in maps, and I'm curious how those types of products are presented. And I have great presentation, Rachel and Brandon. Brandon have so many questions on how you potentially distinguish between climate-driven gully formation and localized disturbance triggered erosion. But maybe we can chat about that offline. But I guess my main question is on the indigenous data piece and how you work with your partners on that.
I
I think
unmuted
it's-
just to say that I think maybe Amanda is better positioned to answer this question, being with Toolik a little bit longer than me, quite a bit longer than me.
But still not that long. So only coming up on 6 years. But so Toolik is working on building relationships with Anativik Pass right now as our nearest neighbor to the field station. So that's mainly been through working with the school and just developing relationships. So as of this moment, I would say we have not gotten there to Cynthia about like actually incorporating indigenous knowledge into observing these kinds of features. But once those relationships are stronger from continuing to visit the community and building trust with the community about how we will manage and use their data as well and like build a model for that, I could definitely see that being a useful and worthwhile thing. Like I do know of events and observations from the community that they've asked about, but are not like a formal, we haven't been studying these features yet. They're like, hey, this happened. It's like, oh, that's a really cool thing. But we haven't actually worked in terms of co-producing any research with them as of yet. We're working on the foundation of building trust and relationships at this point in time. I see you have your hand back up, so.
Yeah, appreciate that response, Amanda. And we welcome you in the data team if you need that space to talk about it, to specifically talk about the data sovereignty piece, care principles, and everything. We have a webinar series on Indigenous data sovereignty and care principles. And if you would like to share your experience there and building that trust and relationship and how you're doing it to the rest of the IARPC data community, feel free to reach out as well. Thanks.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
And Anna, I saw that you had a question in the chat earlier as well. did that get answered, or was there any piece that you all wanted to talk about live?
All good on that one. Just another comment that I just put in. I think the something that I haven't thought of as a researcher in the field, like the grant that I have in Jago, I didn't realize. I knew that I could ask for helicopter support from Toolik and NSF Logistic. I didn't think of that the LiDAR support could come from Toolik as well, for a site that is further away. So I think there's an opportunity there for Toolik to maybe expand or clarify like what Toolik would be able to support in regards to field logistics support outside of Toolik campus itself. Yeah, because I think that's one old reason is that there needs to be it's really beneficial to have field studies that are representing different sites and different areas of the Arctic. That's one of them. So I think if Toolik maybe could consider maybe expand that or clarify, maybe do a little outreach campaign on what they can offer. There is also a way for Toolik to expand its offerings.
100%, Anna. And that's something we're working on, better clarifying both what kind of field assistance, what services we have there at Toolik, what field assistance we can do at the station and around it and further afield, and what our GIS services are and how people can request those. There's a lot of inherited knowledge for how some of the things at Toolik work, and we're trying to be better about welcoming additional new research projects to the field station and how to know what services we offer and access them, rather than getting to the station and being like, oh, I could have asked for this. And so we're trying to branch that out and be more open to the new research projects coming into the station, using our facilities, working with us so that we can help bolster projects that are coming in without everybody having to buy the same sensors and go out and do things on their own. We can help support them. And we're trying to make it a little more clear on our website, but also through information sessions and getting the word out. So 100% agree.
Right. So that was a great conversation on Indigenous data and data management pieces. I just wanted to recognize Tristan, who put a question or a comment in the chat. She's from Neon, and just to recognize, thank you for everything you guys are doing to support research in the Arctic. I don't know if you can speak to this, Tristan. I'll ask you since you're here. Do you know if there are other LiDAR tracks, I assume, across the Arctic, and has anybody done the similar analysis for those, for thermal karst or gullies or whatever that Brandon did?
Not that I'm aware of. I think there is a lot going on. We do have several other sites where we're collecting LiDAR data. But yeah, I'm not aware of anything just like that Brendan did. He also asked if we're scheduled to be up there in 2025, and we are. So we'll have another collection at Toolik coming up this summer.
Yeah, so there's value, of course, going longitudinally over time to the same sites, but I had wanted to look at that regional scale, and I think the Neon network provides that fundamentally with collecting the same data at different sites. So I think in the future, this has been a pretty successful meeting from my perspective. I think we're gonna target maybe another field station meeting next year or later this year. And I'd like to try to target another, one of the Neon field sites if possible. Or any other sites you guys are interested in, we can highlight. So that we're, just covering, we don't have to do it all at once, but we can over a few years cover all the important research sites that federal agencies have been funding. So Allison do you have a question? I think I missed that.
Oh,
Yeah, there's
hi.
a-
I just wanted to thank you guys for highlighting Toolik and all the important work going on there. And I just wanted to echo your suggestion that perhaps it would be great to actually to highlight the work going on at all the field stations, the EOS research hubs, including efforts through various agencies out of the Barrow Arctic Research Center in Upyavik and elsewhere.
Yeah, so this is actually one of the other sites I was thinking of when I was planning this meeting series. That, from what I understand, that site is actually very close to indigenous coastal community, and so that's another opportunity to revisit this indigenous science question. So maybe we should target that for the next time. And if anybody would like to help the tech team plan that, we can, doesn't have to be on GIS next time. It could be any technology focus. I was thinking maybe the towers, what are they called? The air tower, the
Lux.
the Ameriflux, yeah. Ameriflux network, there's a tower up there. We could focus on that or something else. But seeing that we're at the end of our time today, please just contact me offline and if you're interested in participating in that next meeting. But once again, I just want to thank Rachel and Brandon for great talks. You guys did a really great job, really exciting research. So thank you for giving us a great kickoff to this series.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.